You ever feel your stomach drop so hard it feels like the floor fell out from under you? That was me when I opened my bank app and saw the number I'd saved for 5 years vanish into thin air. $15,000 gone, stolen. My landlord, the guy who shook my hand and told me, "Welcome to the building," had moved it into his account like it was nothing. He said it was just a processing error. He laughed when I asked for it back. He actually laughed. That tiny, awful sound was the moment I stopped thinking about being reasonable. I stopped thinking about lawyers or text messages. I started thinking about getting everything back and then some. What I did next? It ended with me taking his entire building. Stick around because this is the part most landlords never see coming. When you move into a place, you tell yourself a lot of things. This is temporary. It will be fine. The landlord seems honest. I told myself all of those too. I had saved every odd job, every gig, every overtime hour for this deposit. The apartment was perfect for me. Sunlight through the windows in the morning, the kind of quiet hallway where you could hear only footsteps and a distant TV, close enough to work that I could walk. The rent was steep, but not crazy. The deposit was not a small thing. It was $15,000 because the building was fancy and the management wanted to guarantee everything. It felt obscene at the time, but I told myself that was just the price of peace and independence. Carl seemed like the type who smelled money. He wore polo shirts with a small stain by the collar and carried himself like he was better than the building. He loved showing people around. He knew every tenant's name, or at least the names he wanted to remember. When he showed me the unit, he called it my piece of the city. He told me stories about how the building had character. He told me those stories while counting the cash he made on the side. People like Carl always have a half smile ready. That half smile hides the rest. At first, everything was normal. I paid my rent, I kept the place clean. I texted Carl a maintenance request once and he fixed it within a day. He seemed almost obliging. The small things he did were like a warm hand on the shoulder. I trusted that hand. That's the weirdest part about people who take advantage of you. They earn your trust first, then they strike. The first hint of trouble came 3 months later when I was moving out for a job that required me to relocate for 8 weeks. I gave notice early and asked for my deposit back. Not because I needed it then, but because having a clear ledger felt right. Carl said no problem. He said he'd have it processed. He gave me a timeline and told me to relax. I was relieved. I packed up my life, loaded 2 suitcases, and left. When I got home 2 months later, I opened my bank app to figure out how much of the deposit was left. I expected to see a figure with a few deductions, maybe cleaning or a light repair. What I saw was nothing like that. The whole $15,000 was gone. It had been transferred out 2 days after I moved out. To who? Carl's account. I called him. He answered like nothing was wrong. "Oh, I took care of that already," he said. "There was damage." I asked what damage. He told me to meet him and we'd sort it out. I asked for photos. He said he'd send them later. He texted me a list of charges that, when I asked for receipts, he never provided. Here is the thing about being shocked. Your brain starts doing stupid things because it's trying to be fair. I tried to be fair. I offered to let him itemize. I said I would pay if something was legitimately broken. I asked for the receipts. He gave me a shrug through the phone. He also made a mistake. He underestimated how much I hated being laughed at. If you want the exact moment things flipped, when I stopped trying to be reasonable and started planning, hit that subscribe button now, because what comes next is the part you cannot unsee. When I met him at the building office under fluorescent lights that smelled faintly of old coffee, he was wearing that same half smile and a polo shirt with a new stain. He handed me a sheet of paper, typed charges that added up to the full deposit. Cleaning, minor repairs, lost rent. The charges were vague, like general wear and tear and utilities. None of them had dates or invoices. None of them had signatures from any contractor. I asked again for proof. He told me it was standard and that tenants often didn't understand lease clauses. I should have left. Maybe I would have been better off going to small claims court and leaving the law to do the work. But the thing about being wronged is it skews your sense of what is possible. The more he smiled and told me the deposit was his, the more my anger fed itself. I left the office with nothing but a photocopy of arbitrary charges and his laugh bouncing in my ears. I filed a police report. They were polite and helpful, and then slow. "These things take time," the officer said. "We will log it." Time was the one luxury I did not have. People who steal like that depend on time to erode your willpower. If you wait, they hide the evidence, move the money, or appeal to some small print that favors the landlord. I had that small print in a scanned lease that talked about owner discretion and reasonable damages. It was bureaucratic hedging. It did not feel like justice. I talked to lawyers. One legal consult was blunt. Small claims might take months, and it may cost me more than my deposit in time and stress. Another lawyer told me to sue and garnish wages and all the normal legal hoops. "You can win," she said, "but it will take time. Time again." The problem with "it will take time" is that it gives bad people a runway. You learn that in life. If someone sees you flinch, they keep kicking. In the weeks after the report, Carl did something predictable. He started to act like a different man. He tightened the building. He was less chatty in the hallways. He increased petty enforcement. Suddenly, tenants who had been parking bikes in the lobby received notes. He installed a new doorman who watched faces more intensely. I could feel his paranoia. He had stolen with the casual confidence of someone who thinks they got away with it. That arrogance is as giving as a confession. I started going through the building's public records, land registry stuff that most people never look at. I found a chain of ownership, mortgage liens, and a few LLC names that all pointed to the same person, Carl. He was not just a landlord. He was a small empire with a dozen owners and a history of small legal skirmishes. He liked to buy cheap, rent high, flip accounts. He also liked to keep his operations thin and legal enough to make suits slow and confusing. There's a point where investigation moves out of curiosity and into strategy. I stopped seeing this as a fight for a single sum and started to see this as a structural problem. Carl did not steal my money because of a mistake. He stole my money because the system he built made it easy. If you want to stop the people built into that system, you don't fight a single scuffle. You attack the infrastructure. If you think this is a story about a deposit, you're missing the point. I'll show you the plan I built to go after his whole setup. Hit like if you want me to keep going, and do not blink now.
When I decided to stop relying on outside authorities for speed, I made a list. Not a list of grudges, but a list of leverage. Everyone has leverage, things they don't want exposed, documents they can't replace, people they owe favors to. Mine was a set of small, ugly truths you can find if you look for them. First, there were the leases. Some of the apartment contracts were sloppy, poorly written by an overworked clerk. They had inconsistent clauses. Some units were technically sublet. Some leases had expired, but tenants were still paying under verbal agreements. These are the kind of cracks you exploit if you know landlord-tenant law. Second, there were the contractors. Carl paid cash to a few people for cleanups and repairs. No invoices, no proper paperwork. He relied on a cash chain because it covered his tracks. Those contractors were people with families who would talk if they felt threatened with legal scrutiny. Third, there were the mortgages and the lender. You'd be surprised how quickly banks respond when someone threatens to expose fraud or fraud-like behavior. Mortgage lenders do not like their collateral to be misrepresented. Fourth, and most importantly, there were the other tenants. I started quietly talking to people, not yelling in the corridors, not dramatics, just one conversation at a time. There was Rita on the third floor, whose rent had mysteriously increased mid-lease. There was Jamal, who had been told to pay maintenance fees that were never explained. There was a couple with 2 kids who had been hit with a cleaning fee that made them skip meals for a week. People had stories and grudges. They had receipts and bank transfers and pictures. Individually, these were annoyances. Together, they formed a pattern. Most people wait until pain becomes unbearable and then act. I realized people were just waiting for someone to give them permission to act. I became that permission. I told them plainly, I will help you get your money back, but we do this smart. We do this public. We met in a coffee shop with low lighting and a polite playlist. I drew a simple plan on a napkin. We would gather documentation. We would file complaints together. We would contact the lender and the public housing authority, and we would leak the story to a local reporter if Carl refused to cooperate. We would make this ugly enough that a mortgage company would want to cut ties. I told them we would escalate slowly, then quickly. I told them the truth. This would be messy and might take guts. They all nodded. It was not all noble. Some wanted their money back right away. Some wanted revenge. Some wanted closure. That is fair. I had come to a moral understanding that when someone takes advantage of a community, the community has every right to respond. We were not out for blood. We were out for balance. The most crucial weapon in our plan, however, was a tiny legal mechanic not many tenants knew about. In our city, landlords who collect deposits must keep them in separate escrow accounts or risk penalties and fines. If you failed to do that, the penalties could be financially devastating and, more importantly, public. It was a nerdy little law, and it was the perfect lever. If Carl had mingled deposits with his operating funds, that was not just rude, it was illegal. The lender would care because their asset might be mismanaged. The city would care because it was a consumer protection issue. The press would care because people loved a David versus landlord story. But laws do not work on their own. You have to push them. And so we pushed. We filed formal complaints, not one by one, but in a group. We went to the housing authority with receipts and statements. We made sure each tenant's timeline was clear. We took photos of work that was paid for, but never done right. We called contractors and asked them if they'd been paid by check or cash. One contractor flinched and admitted to cash payments. That little confession smelled like gasoline in the right room. I will not lie, it felt dangerous. The thrill you get when you realize you are in motion can be intoxicating. You have to check that thrill because it is the thing that makes people take unnecessary risks. We did not break in. We did not threaten. We used paperwork, conversation, and the eventual threat of publicity. The idea was simple. Make it more costly for him to stay in business than to do the right thing. We were 2 steps away from pulling the trigger. If you want to know how we turned a bunch of angry tenants and a stack of receipts into something that could actually take his building, hit that subscribe button and keep watching. The next part is the execution, and it gets wild. Execution is where plans are fragile and true character shows. We started with paperwork. Tenants filed formal complaints all in the same week. The housing authority logged it and sent a notice. The mortgage company got curious when I sent them a carefully worded email pointing out inconsistencies in income reporting and escrow handling. I did not threaten. I simply asked for clarification and attached a few documents that looked official and reasonable. Lenders hate ambiguity. That week, a contractor I had contacted called me back. He said he had been paid in cash and was worried. I told him that if he cooperated, we would keep him out of trouble and help him get paid properly. He agreed to record a statement about cash payments. That statement was a tiny bomb. It proved a practice of off-books exchanges. It supported the claim that Carl was mingling funds. The housing authority opened an investigation. They asked for bank statements for the deposit accounts. That is when things got loud. Carl's accounting didn't match up. Either he had been lazy or he had been deliberate. Either way, the paperwork did not save him. Next, we did the slow burn with the press. I reached out to a local reporter who had a reputation for exposing landlord scams. I gave her documents, tenant statements, and a timeline. She smelled a story with traction and called. Her editor called the housing authority. The housing authority, now under the light of media attention, moved faster than they had on isolated complaints. Carl started to panic. He called tenants and tried to buy silence with false promises and quick payouts that never materialized. He offered partial refunds that he retracted. He threatened legal action, saying we were libeling him. He sent an email to tenants asking them to reconsider their complaints. He did not know we had already spoken to the lender. One afternoon, the building manager, a quiet woman named Lorna, came into my apartment. Her hands trembled. She told me that Carl had been receiving irregular deposits into an account labeled maintenance. She had access to receipts and had seen checks that didn't match the ledger. She was terrified because she could lose her job for exposing anything. I promised her protection. She gave me files. Those files had dates that matched when tenants' deposits went missing. It was like finding fingerprints at a crime scene. The lender froze some accounts pending clarification. The housing authority issued an emergency notice to the building requiring an audit of deposits and a suspension of certain collections. The media ran a story titled, "Local Landlord Accused of Fraud." It was not yet a verdict, but it was loud and ugly. A loud and ugly story makes bankers nervous. This is where the building's mortgage started to wobble. When a lender feels that a property is being mismanaged and that the risk has increased, they consider foreclosure to protect their collateral. The lender called in a compliance officer. That officer requested an immediate inspection. The inspection found accounting irregularities. The lender issued a notice to Carl. Fix this or we exercise remedies. At that point, Carl had a choice that most people in his position never see as a real choice. He could either come clean, return the deposits, and try to fix his business with professional help, or he could resist. He resisted. He doubled down on denials, he made wild accusations, and he tried to get the tenants to sign non-disclosure agreements for small amounts. That looked bad on camera. It looked worse to the lender. Then came a legal maneuver that changed everything. Some of the tenants I had gathered had months of proof. Rita had bank transfers. Jamal had text messages where Carl admitted to taking care of deposits. The housing authority used the evidence to file civil penalties and recommended criminal referral. The lender, worried about the liability, took a fail-safe step. They accelerated the loan. Acceleration means the lender demands the balance of the mortgage immediately. It's a nuclear option. The only way Carl could satisfy it was to come up with a huge sum of money. He could not. He had no liquidity. The lender sent a notice of default and a plan to move to foreclosure. That is the part most people miss. You don't need to be the one to foreclose. You can set conditions that cause creditors to act. When a lender forecloses, the owner loses control of the property. There is no revenge more absolute than taking away the very thing someone used to control and exploit others. On a gray Tuesday, the bank's lawyer came to the building with documents. They were polite, but firm. They were doing what creditors do. They served notice of enforcement. Carl panicked and tried to get the tenants to drop the complaints by offering them a portion of their money back if they signed away their rights. Some accepted small amounts for fear. Others refused. The building was quieter. People walked with the hollow look of people watching two bigger forces fight. Then came the sale. The bank, not wanting to sit on bad real estate, put the property up for sale at auction. I watched the notice posted on the lobby bulletin board like a man waiting for a verdict. Some people felt vindicated. Others felt guilty. Carl had been arrogant enough to make enemies of the wrong people. He had relied on a system where time shields crime. We made sure there was no time. If you think this ends with a bank seizure and a sad landlord,
you are not ready for the twist. Hit like, and I will tell you the part where I turned the auction into something he never imagined. Auctions are weird. They are equal parts mechanical and theatrical. Real estate people love drama. Banks prefer clean transactions, but auctions get eyes on the property and often fetch a tidy price. I had a final move planned. It was not illegal, and it was not petty. It was clever and surgical. I knew some investors from past temp jobs and community work. I reached out quietly and asked if anyone would be willing to partner on a bid that could keep the building in local hands, with the goal of returning deposits to tenants and stabilizing the property. A few said yes, not because they wanted my revenge, because they wanted a building that was well-run and had a tenant base ready to pay. We formed a consortium, a small group of investors with enough capital to make a credible bid. We submitted our paperwork, we showed up at the auction, and watched as buyers came and went. The highest bids at these auctions are often corporations looking to flip quickly. They wanted to buy cheap and sell high. Our bid was different. It accounted for repairs, for catching up on legal compliance, and for ensuring tenants were not evicted in the process. We bid competitively and won. People imagine winning means you get the building that very second. It is not instantaneous. There is closing and settlement and legal formalities, but the effect was immediate. The bank had recovered their loan, and Carl had lost his property. He lost his building not because of mob justice, but because he had mismanaged finances and violated rules that make lenders nervous. It is ironic in a bitter way. Greed made him sloppy, and sloppiness cost him everything. After the sale, our consortium did something predictable and something unexpected. Predictable, we paid the housing authority the fines and entered into a remediation plan. We filed paperwork that showed deposits must be returned or accounted for. Unexpected, we set up a tenant restitution fund. We audited the accounts, and where evidence showed deposits were taken improperly, we returned money. It was not always the full sum for everyone because money had been spent over the years, but we did more than any of us expected. Rita got her increase rescinded. Jamal received 3 months of back payment. A few people who had been living under the pressure of surprise fees slept without worry for the first time in years. Carl did not disappear quietly. He tried to sue, to appeal, and to paint himself as a victim of a tenant conspiracy. The courts did not buy it. Evidence, documentation, and recorded statements mattered. The lender's records mattered. An incredible pile of small truths added up to a coherent picture that favored the victims. I will not say I felt no satisfaction. Watching someone who laughed at you lose what they used to hold over others is a strange thrill. But the deeper satisfaction came later, when I watched tenants in the lobby trade recipes and when kids who had moved into the building played in the small courtyard without being shushed. The building did not become a utopia overnight. There were repairs and new rules. There were tough conversations about rent increases and maintenance standards, but the scales had tipped back toward fairness. There is an important afterthought here. Revenge stories can seduce you into thinking the bad guy disappears and you walk off a hero. Real life is messier. We had to manage the building responsibly. We had to hold a few difficult meetings where tenants who had been left behind were prioritized. We had to be careful about hiring new management and about creating policies that prevented a rerun. I learned that reclaiming power is not only about taking something away from someone, it's about what you do with it afterwards. Several months later, the Housing Authority released a report that recommended reforms for deposit handling across similar properties. The bank tightened oversight. A local nonprofit used our building as a case study for tenant organizing. Those were the small ripples that mattered. As for my deposit, I got a significant portion back through the restitution fund and negotiated settlements. It was not all the original $15,000 because some funds had been moved and were no longer recoverable, but it was close enough to rebuild. More than money, though, I got something else, a lesson in how to channel anger into strategy. I also got a community that afterwards treated me with a wary respect than an easy smile. If you are sitting at home and someone has taken something from you, do not rush to dramatic choices. The law matters, and most disputes are solved by patience and paperwork. But if the system is too slow, or if the person who wronged you is built into a structure that protects them, you have options. Document everything. Talk to others. Use public mechanisms that force speed. Banks and regulators almost always respond to scrutiny. The press certainly does. Revenge felt good for a moment, but the real win was building something that prevented the same harm from happening to the next person. I did not become a vigilante. I became a neighbor who refused to accept theft as the status quo. There is a moral in that. If you enjoyed this story and want the full breakdown of the specific legal steps we took, the emails we used, and the exact checklist for building a tenant complaint that actually makes institutions act, drop a comment below and I will post it. If you want more stories like this, where people get creative and win back their dignity, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. There will be more. And if you are a landlord watching this, thinking the world owes you something, maybe do better. Keep proper records. Treat people fairly. Laughing at someone who asks for their money back will come back to haunt you. Thanks for listening.